And my thinking is, if you want the youth to be active, focus on the father. Bring the father to church. Make sure he's happy, engaged, active. He will bring his children.
That can be an engaging conversation, but if you're a tired dad, you end up just snoring so loud that everyone can't hear the teacher, and somebody has to go and like wake you up, which is what happened right behind me. I had this guy just belting it out, just.
And now for a cultural call-out. We sure don't appreciate that.
So today we're talking about the Elders Quorum, or as some people have called it, the forgotten organization of the church. If you go to a ward council, you'll see that the amount of budget that the Elders Quorum gets compared to all the other organizations, pretty significant. They
essentially nil, yeah.
There's a big difference between the Elders budget, the Relief Society budget, the primary budget, and all of that. And I get it. Usually the budget is based off of like, well, how much are you going to use? And for the most part, that tells you if you're not getting anything for your Elders Quorum budget, it means your Elders Quorum isn't really doing that much. So I don't want to just talk about budget, though. I want to talk about real boots on the ground impact of what I'm calling a forgotten Elders Quorum or an ignored Elders Quorum. So what is that doing? I'm sure that you have probably experienced some Elders Quorums like these. I'm sure I know that I have, absolutely. So I'll give you some of my experiences, and then we'll talk about it from there. From basically, in a majority of the Elders Quorums that I've been in, everyone is flying by the seat of their pants at the Elders Quorum. So the instructor, he gets up, half the time he's like, hey, didn't really prepare, didn't know that I was teaching today, so let's just crack open general conference or come follow me and let's just get a volunteer to read the first paragraph, and then it just kind of everyone just takes turns reading paragraphs. And then anytime there was like a question, it's always just like, so what does that mean to you? Or what stood out to you guys about that? And then there are usually like 2 or 3 high priests that just dominate the conversation. Like these older guys, they take the scenic route to get to their point every single time. And it just turns into like an hour of just 2 guys talking about something that they learned 50 years ago, and then everyone else just kind of checks out and they leave. Mentally, you're not very present in most of these Elders Quorums. Activities usually don't happen. And the activities that are happening are usually like a father and son's activity, and then it's service projects and moving. And then outside of that, you really don't spend too much time with your Elders Quorum brethren. Usually it's just kind of a Sunday thing. You kind of check in, check out. How does that relate to your experience? Am I crazy over here?
No, I've had that experience many, many times. I think that with Elder Quorum, it just becomes like an extension of your chores list, like your home chores list. Then you have like shovel the driveway, move people in and out, like that becomes the most frequent points of contact is when you have to show up to help people, which is not a bad thing to serve, right? But if you're looking for a quorum that kind of supports and upholds you, that's, service alone is not going to do that, right? Now, the ward I'm in right now, they're actually a lot better than some of the wards I've had in the past, which is nice. So it's good to see them working hard to have engaging lessons. But you're right, you got to be careful, because if you're not prepared on your lesson and you're not engaging with good questions, then it just becomes a high priest podcast, right? Yeah. So the whole thing will just become a high priest podcast, and those are not I do not subscribe to any of those personally, No. So we actually last week we had a lesson that was a little bit dry. There's some questions like, why does Jesus love us? And it's like, okay, like what is trust versus faith? And like, that can be an engaging conversation, but if you're a tired dad, you end up just snoring so loud that everyone can't hear the teacher, and somebody has to go and like wake you up, which is what happened right behind me. I had this guy just belting it out, just really sawing through logs. He was snoring so loud. Yeah, it was pretty hilarious. Nobody in the room was mad at him. Everyone could empathize quite, readily. That's one thing in Elders Quorum you'll find, is that everyone understands that we're exhausted and, that we're rather unkept when it comes to our spiritual grouping there. Yeah. But I think that budget-wise, culturally-wise, the men just show up and they want to check out as soon as possible and go back to their families and help out. It's definitely like a mental shift that needs to happen.
it seems like there's this attitude where people view Elders Quorum almost like a holding pin. It's like, hey, here's the holding pin until we need you for another calling in the ward. It's like, if we need to call you into primary, we'll just call you from the Elders Quorum. You can go there or into the Young Men's or do whatever. But in the meantime, here's just like this, you get to sit with all these other guys in the same room and you just kind of have to sit quietly together. It's not
it's like the
very
dugout,
engaging.
Yeah. Yeah, when you're playing baseball, you go sit in the dugout until it's your turn to bat, and a lot of people treat it like that.
Yes.
You go up for, you're in the bishopric for a couple of years, and then you go back to the dugout after you've taken your swings, and you just kind of wait
right.
there. That's what Elders Quorum feels like. Yeah, go sit on the bench and chill out, which it really should be like more engaging, But I feel like there'd be a lot of Elders Quorum presidencies that would feel uncomfortable bringing up, hey, we're going to go paintballing. Or, hey, we're going to go to an adult arcade as the Elders Quorum, something fun. I think getting budget for that culturally might be tough, right? Because it seems weird that men would be spending so much money on themselves. That's just not something the Elders Quorum does a whole lot. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've had off
Well,
Elders
and it's
Quorum,
interesting. That brings up a good question. Why do you think it is that the Elders Quorum, and this is something that I want in the comments too, why do you think that Elders Quorum has such a hard time with activities? Because I served in presidencies, Elders Quorum presidencies for 8 years in different wards. Like, in these presidencies, I was usually in charge of activities. My whole idea was like, if I'm going to be planning this activity, it better be fun. It better be something that I'm going to look forward to. So I would set up like shooting days. We would set up like board game nights. We'd set up everything like that. Just trying to do fun things, like dodgeball, pickleball. There was a lot of different activities that we tried. And there was never like one activity that really just went over the top and did super, super well. Usually it was like 2 or 3 guys that would show up. I would say that was average. Like, for activity, it was just like, all right, 2 or 3 guys would show up. We would spend the budget on this activity. And then the problem is that the ward would look at that and they would classify that as like a failure of an activity. They'd be like, well, that activity failed. We better not do that. That was wasted budget. But I mean, I don't know. I see it, and I saw it differently. I saw it as like, hey, these are 2 or 3 dads that are worn out, that are exhausted, that took some time for a little bit of self-care, and had some fun. So I think it's absolutely worth it. I just think there's such a stigma to the quorum. But why do you think it is that elders do not attend activities? Because that's a question that I don't know that I know the answer to. I've been trying for years.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest hurdle is just like a diversity of experience, right? Like sometimes in the wards, like you're different politically, you're different, physically, like your hobbies are different. Like the only thing tying you together is the gospel, which should be enough for sure. But that can, when it comes to optional voluntary attendance to these activities, then a lot of people just tap out,
Yeah.
Like they're not making friends,
So to your point, you have like the high priests and then you have the Elders Quorum, and the high priests are usually like a bunch of old guys that are saying like, hey, maybe a shooting activity is not for me. Maybe it was back in the day, but I'm not doing that anymore. Maybe pickleball is too aggressive for these old joints. So, I mean, they love like the family home evening groups and stuff like that. I get that, So what else? What do you think? What are the other reasons besides like the demographics?
I think the time, just taking the time out of your schedule is tough for dads, for men. I also just think the actual scheduling of when that happens usually is like, it feels like young men and young women's have pretty prime spots, activity days, Relief Society, they all get those pretty prime spots during the week. Elders Quorum activities are usually just kind of shunted into the weekend somewhere, and nobody wants to go to a church activity on the weekend. Like that's your time, that's your weekend time to catch up and do things like that. So,
well, you brought up another point here: Relief Society activities. So this is the missing piece. Is like you'll see that like Relief Society activities, from my experience, from what Chanel has gone through over the years, they're pretty well attended. Like usually they'll get about like 10 to 20, maybe even 30 people. These are Utah wards, keep in mind, like out there socializing, having a good time, supported, doing all of that. And that's like consistent, and it justifies their budget. So I'm curious, like why you see that level of engagement with the Relief Society, and then on the Elders Quorum side of it, you just don't see it.
Yeah, well, I think that women are more people oriented, just they're more social oriented
Yeah,
in their nature. I think men are more object oriented, right? They're more thing oriented.
totally.
I saw a TikTok recently where this woman said, you give your husband quests, like he wants quests, he needs
Yeah.
missions,
What does she mean by
like
quests?
she said like she had this situation where she had this problem with like the sink or something like that and she was going to fix it and the husband said, well, I can fix that for you. And she said, no, I'm not, I'm going to fix it, you're fine. And she didn't want to take that his time away from him, but what she didn't realize is that he that's the way he showed love. That's one way he could get engaged and being supportive is like fixing a problem, right?
Yeah.
So she said, send your husband on a quest. When he comes back, praise him for working hard. Men love quests. I think that applies to Elders Quorum. Like that's why they show up for service activities because men love quests. They want to go out and help someone or
Yeah.
fix something. And when they come back, they feel productive. If I go eat, if I go eat pizza in the cultural hall and play apples to apples, I'm not going to feel like super productive, and I feel like a lot of men have a guilt feeling associated with lack of productivity when it comes to doing that, or they just have other things they'd rather do for fun, right? So if it's a fun activity, there's other things they'd rather do than go play apples to apples with their 80-year-old neighbor, so
Right.
there's
Right.
there's a whole bunch of different things that could be contributing to the issue of why Elders Quorum members aren't showing up. But I think one of the big ones is that like it needs more purpose in those activities, something that can really draw people together and focus on something.
And there were times where we would put together like campouts and stuff like that, hikes, and we just got zero response, zero feedback from it. Uh, the one thing, I did hear this multiple times from different elders. They would tell me like, yeah, I don't know, whenever I feel bad leaving my wife at home because I'm at work all day, and then I get home and I need to be with my family and I need to spend time with them, and so they end up not going to these elders quorum activities, and they end up, not overall. And you might look at that in what time at one time that might be like, okay, yeah, sure, spend time with your family. But if that's happening consistently throughout the year and then throughout multiple years, it becomes an increasingly bigger and bigger deal because it means that you're turning down opportunities to connect and engage with a network of strength that could be a resource to you when you're struggling. That won't be there, And
Yeah.
I've seen it as well. You do feel guilty. You're spending all day at work, and then it's like, oh, there's this really fun thing going on. I better stay home, and help out my wife with the kids because that's what I'm supposed to do. And then when it comes to Relief Society, it's just like, I need to give my wife a break is kind of the mentality of like, hey, get out there. So I do think there is some of that. I do think there is a little bit of imbalance when it comes to support. But there are some things that I wanted to point out and bring up that may sway your mind. If this is your mindset like that of like anytime he's home, this is now family time. I want to bring some things up that may change that. And I'm not sure if we're allowed to say this word. So I didn't do research beforehand. I'll do it after. But the popular term is unaliving is what people are saying nowadays. But so if we're looking at the rates of people unaliving themselves in Utah, the highest rate in the state by far, by like multiple, is males aged 35 to 44. Highest unaliving rate
Jeez.
in the entire state. 49.3 per 100,000 population. The next closest to that is like, and this is across demographics, is like 15 per 100,000 population.
Wow.
So it is substantial and it is significant. Now, granted, this is the entire state of Utah. This doesn't just mean members inside the church. But I do think since Utah probably has the highest population of church membership, it's worth looking into and saying, wait a second, what's going on with the Elders Quorum? Why are we seeing this really high unaliving rate in Utah?
Right.
And what can an Elders Quorum do to combat that, to help bring these men in? So we're seeing a pandemic of loneliness is basically how I would put it. Is And if you put yourself in their shoes, it makes a little bit more sense. If I think about this correctly, it's like, okay, I spend all day at work. Work is usually not something that makes you click your heels and jump for joy. It's usually kind of hard. It's a grind. It's a little tedious. So you're spending your day at work. It's tough. You get home, and then your job is to be the shoulder that everyone can lean on, right? You're helping out with the kids. You're helping out with the wife.
Yeah.
You're trying to support and provide and do everything. And then it seems like self-care for a lot of men, and I know a lot of men where this is absolutely the case. Self-care becomes the very bottom of their priority, where they're like, okay, if everything else is done, then I will take care of myself. And I think that is pretty dangerous. That's a very, very dangerous practice. There was this book that came out. It's called The Rabbit Effect. And it's in it, it said chronic loneliness is about as unhealthy as smoking a pack of cigarettes per day. And if you think about that, it's like, whoa. So there's actually a negative health impact of not connecting with those around you, not having a sense of brotherhood, not having a sense of self-care, not being able to kind of do things for yourself and have a fun time, So there's a call for community in that statistic. There's a call for brotherhood. And that is what the Elders Quorum is supposed to do. It's supposed to be that for you. Now, there's another statistic that I wanted to show your way before we start talking. There is this study that was done, and I think it was in Switzerland, where they were looking at church attendance with families, and they were studying church attendance over time with like a father that regularly went to church, a mother that regularly went to church, irregularly went to church, and then didn't go to church at all. They looked at all of the combinations of that possible, and then they looked and saw, how did that impact children? So here's the table of their findings, and it is fascinating. So over here in the left-hand side, we see practice of parents, and then on the right-hand side, the practice of the children. Over here, this is the father column, the mother column, and then the children column of regular, irregular, and non-practicing when it comes to religion. So with the father, when father and mother are regularly attending, both of them at the same time, you see that the odds of the child regularly attending are about 32.8%. Not that great, but still
that could be better.
Higher than a lot of these others. The really interesting call out here is look down here. So if the mother is regularly going and the father is non-practicing, you get the lowest statistic out there. This is 1.5% of children will regularly attend or practice.
That's crazy.
So 1.5. And that's if the mom is going like every single week. The children are like, yeah, you can expect 1.5% of your children to be regular. Now, if the father is regular and the wife, the mom, is not practicing, we can find that right here. See that? 44.2% of children will practice regularly their religion. So there's something going on here, right? which is pretty crazy. So it means, among other things, like it shows, I think, the influence and the importance of a father when it comes to religion. We've always been focusing on the youth, I think, for a long time, and rightly so. I think the youth deserve a ton of attention. I worry, though, that in that zeal of focusing on the youth, that we are neglecting the fathers. And my thinking is like, if you want the youth to be active, focus on the father, bring the father to church, make sure he's happy, engaged, active, feels that brotherhood, feels that connection, and he will bring his children. That's been my thinking for a little bit, and that's what I've seen in families where the father is taking a proactive stance in their faith and he's proactively encouraging his family to attend regularly. I think that's where you see the salt of the earth members coming. That's where children are like, man, dad really believes this. It cuts against his nature, and then they follow him to church. So what can Elders Quorums do? What's the takeaway here for the Elders Quorum? How can they do better?
There just needs to be like an earnest attempt to make friends, like to connect on personal levels.
Yeah.
And I think that's very difficult to do all by your lonesome as a presidency. But I think you just focus on one elder at a time and try and excuse me. I think you just focus on one elder at a time and just try and focus, on their interests, on who they are as people.
Yeah.
Connect on a real level and try and forge some actual bonds there. That's what really needs to happen. There are a bunch of different mechanisms you can use to make that happen, but at the end result, like actual friendship is what's needed.
I think that's absolutely encapsulated in the idea of ministering. You have your ministering assignments, but you're told to be a minister to everybody, and it's like, yes. And what I saw over the years is like that connection would start to come out more and more, and brethren would feel connected to each other if there were ministering interviews happening. So if they felt like they were going to be accountable for their efforts to minister or to be a friend to somebody else or to a family, then they actually would do it. And that was the crazy part. We had this really awesome Elders Quorum presidency. We had a secretary that would just work tirelessly setting up all of these appointments for the ministering interviews because we had a huge ward. And when we did these interviews, they would relate. They would connect. We were able to get to know them. They got to know us. They got to know each other. And we saw the quorum begin to come together a little bit more. So I think ministering is definitely a part of it. I think another part of it is teaching. I think if you're in the presidency, you have to be super, super, super careful about who you call as an Elders Quorum teacher. Because that could be the make or break of a quorum. We had a great teacher. He was Brother Keat. Man, his lessons were lessons that I looked forward to. He looked at the Come Follow Me outline for the week, and then he would just draw out like 2 or 3 really relevant questions for men in their daily lives. And then he'd put it up on a screen and he'd say, all right, let's talk about these questions. And it just turned into this really big, engaging discussion. And he would pepper it with like Jocko Willink quotes and David Goggins and stuff like that. Like really masculine figures. And I really appreciated it. Like it made me look forward to his lessons. He got a ton of engagement just from everybody. Even the young guys started participating, which was really, really cool to see that. So I think that's the other call out there. And then I think the third is don't give up on your activities. Like keep those activities going. Because I do think you just have to train it into the ward. You have to make it into a habit. And don't give up if you see you do an activity and like 2 people come. Don't say like, oh, well, we better not do it. Because I think a lot of this is tradition. I think a lot of people are just falling back into tradition of like, I better not, And so I'm going to, elders don't meet. Elders don't do activities. That's not for us. That's childish, But I think it requires like a mindset shift to say like, no, this is actually something that's going to make you healthier, not only physically, but mentally and spiritually and emotionally. And so for wives out there that are frustrated with like an unengaged father or an unengaged, husband, encourage them, get them out. If you see that there's an Elders Quorum activity, push them into that activity. Make sure that they go out there. Be their mom and tell them to make friends, okay? On their way to school. Hey, you make some friends today. And
if your husband has friends, he'll probably bug you less,
That's right. Yeah.
Get him out there. Yeah, I think that, and that's not all. It's not like only a fraction of that responsibility is on the presidency and the Elders Quorum.
Yeah.
As the actual members of the Elders Quorum, like text your ministering folks and invite them, text the brethren, say, hey, are you coming to the activity? Let's go to the activity. Start talking about what they do and who they are and what interests them. Engage them, have fun. Like it's really hard to have fun as a father, like intentionally without your children around, like to just engage in fun is kind of a tricky thing. So something needs to be practiced.
Let's just say there's an elder out there who wants to connect more with the quorum, but they're not doing anything. They're a stagnant quorum. There's not a whole lot going on. What would your advice be to that elder out there?
Yeah, if there's a stagnant quorum, there's not a lot going on. Like start with who you minister to and try and engage with them. Invite them over. Just, host your own activities. There's nothing that says you can't do that, right?
Yeah.
Have your own parties, go camping with a couple of brethren from the ward. You do stuff like that, it'll get noticed really quick. And, people will catch on and it'll be contagious. I think that'll really lighten up the Elders Quorum if you do that.
I agree. I've done that a handful of times. I've gone camping with like a handful of different guys in the ward it's just us and like a couple of our kids, and we just go and we spend a couple nights in the woods. It's a really good time, and
Yeah.
and every time I've done that, I've heard back from these guys just like, "Hey, that was awesome. Let's do it again sometime." And it's like, "Yeah, it was cool." That was
Right?
really fun.
Yeah.
I know that you're doing something right now to combat this plague of loneliness, this discouragement, and lack of connectedness. Do you want to give us a little bit more information about that?
Yeah, it's called Dads Need Friends. Just a little group. Right now, we just have a Discord server. We play video games. We have book clubs. We do little show and tells on our hobbies, things like that. So if you go to dadsneedfriends.com, you can join our Discord server. We'd love to have you. So if your Elders Quorum is not where you want it to be, and if you need friends, come on over. I started because I realized that we all, as adult fathers, need friends, right? Like
Right. Well,
there
especially
is a
growing up in
loneliness
the
epidemic.
90s with like the LAN parties and the
Oh yeah,
Halo parties. And it's just like, yeah, you got a lot of focus in the youth programs, and that was super cool. And then you go through, you get married. That's great. You get a lot of attention. And then I feel like the attention just kind of stops. Like you're a man now. And it's
yeah,
like, yeah, well, you're supposed to be the one giving attention now. But I feel like the focus just kind of stops, and you're just like, okay, now what? But I think that's super cool. I've been having fun with those nights as well. Like I hop on. So it's a really good time. We've invited a couple people from our wards to hop on. So we've got a good little group. We've been doing it now for what, 5 or 6 months?
yeah. It's been great, and we're playing a couple different games right now. Chivalry 2 is a great one. Simulated warfare is a great way to bond with people without actually hurting anybody. So yeah, we meet Wednesday nights and we game them, and sometimes we game on the weekends too. So I invite everyone to come and join, and let's just have some fun. It's a hard thing to do as a father. It's a hard thing to squeeze in, but when you can do it at 9 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night, you can find the time. So we invite everyone to come.
I love that point. Men socialize through action, not through talking. And so being able to
Exactly.
just like play video games with friends, it's something that you love doing growing up. It's something that we're trying to help you do now. So come out there if you are stuck in a lonely Elders Quorum that's not doing much. You've got an invite here.
And don't be intimidated. We are absolutely terrible at these games. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
we're not here to win.
We're
Just here to
horrible.
have a good time.
I get
Yeah.
slaughtered. I'm like the worst ranked member in the whole group. Like I get slaughtered every time. But it's a good time. We share a lot of laughs. It's a lot of fun.